The gym was quiet, eerily so. After hours, when the hum of fluorescent lights replaced the clanging weights and chatter of athletes, the space felt different, almost intimate. Coach Darnell had asked me to stay behind after our session, his voice casual, though something in his tone left a ripple in the stillness. I stayed, of course. He was my coach, the man who'd taught me everything about the game I loved, about discipline, strength, and focus. The man who'd always believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. But tonight was different. He stood by the bench press, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dim glow of the exit sign. His usual commanding presence felt softer, almost hesitant. I'd been struggling during practice lately, distracted by thoughts I couldn't quite name. Maybe he'd noticed. Maybe he was worried about me. "Take a seat, Mason," he said, nodding toward the bench. I did as he asked, feeling the vinyl cushion press against my thighs. Coach leaned against the weight rack, his arms crossed, his gaze steady. He looked at me the way he did when analyzing my technique, though tonight his eyes held something I couldn't quite place. "You've been off your game," he said, his voice low but not unkind. I nodded, my throat dry. "I know. I'm sorry." He waved off the apology. "It's not about being sorry. I just want to know what's going on. You're one of my best athletes, Mason. But lately, you've been somewhere else. Talk to me." The sincerity in his voice made my chest tighten. Coach wasn't just my trainer. He'd become a mentor, a steady presence during the chaos of my life. I wanted to tell him everything. The confusion, the frustration, the strange pull I felt every time I looked at him. But how could I? "It's nothing," I said, my voice barely audible. "Just stuff." He didn't let it slide. "Stuff can mess with your head, kid. And when your head's not in the game, it affects everything. You've got to deal with it." He moved closer, his hand resting on the edge of the bench. His fingers were strong, calloused from years of lifting and coaching, and when they brushed against mine, it felt like static electricity crackling through my skin. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. Coach noticed. His gaze flicked to our hands, then back to my face. For a moment, the air between us grew heavy, charged with something neither of us dared to name. "Listen," he said, his voice softer now. "If you can't talk to me as your coach, talk to me as your friend. I'm here, Mason. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone." The words hit me like a weight to the chest. He didn't know how much I'd been carrying, how long I'd been wrestling with feelings I didn't understand. Feelings that had started to surface whenever we were alone, like now. "I don't know how to explain it," I admitted, my voice trembling. "It's just hard." Coach nodded, his hand moving to rest lightly on my shoulder. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down my spine. "You don't have to explain it all at once. Just start somewhere." I looked up at him then, really looked at him. His dark eyes held no judgment, only patience and something deeper, something that made my pulse quicken. And in that moment, I felt the fragile line between us begin to blur. I swallowed hard, the weight of his hand on my shoulder anchoring me to the moment. The steady hum of the gym's air conditioning filled the silence as I wrestled with words that refused to come. Coach didn't push me, his patience unnerving in its calmness. He had a way of making you feel seen, a way that was comforting and unsettling at once. "It's just," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at the floor, focusing on the scuffed tiles as if they held the answers I couldn't find. "I've been feeling off. Like I don't know what I want anymore." Coach tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable but attentive. "Off how?" His question was gentle, yet it felt like a spotlight. I hesitated, my mind racing. How could I tell him the truth? How could I explain that every time he smiled at me, every time he leaned in close to adjust my form or gave me an encouraging pat on the back, my stomach would flip and my chest would tighten in ways I couldn't control. I shifted uncomfortably, the words tangling in my throat. "I don't know. I finally said, my voice cracking. It's just complicated. Coach's hand squeezed my shoulder, firm but reassuring. Life's complicated, Mason. Doesn't mean you have to face it alone. His words hit deeper than he probably intended. I looked up at him, and for the first time, I didn't try to hide the vulnerability in my eyes. He held my gaze, his expression softening in a way that made my chest ache. "You're a good kid," he said, his voice low but steady. "You've got a lot going for you. Whatever's weighing you down, it's not going to break you." I won't let it. There was a warmth in his words that wrapped around me like a shield, but it only made the knot in my chest tighten. Because what I felt wasn't just gratitude or admiration. It was something far more dangerous, something I couldn't ignore anymore. "I don't feel like a good kid," I admitted, the confession spilling out before I could stop it. "I feel messed up." Coach frowned, his brows knitting together. "Why would you say that?" I hesitated, my pulse racing. The space between us felt smaller now, the air thick with something unspoken. "Because I feel things I shouldn't." His hand slipped from my shoulder, but he didn't move away. Instead, he crouched slightly, bringing himself to my eye level. His gaze was steady, piercing in its intensity. "Mason, there's no such thing as a shouldn't when it comes to feelings. What matters is how you deal with them." I shook my head, my hands gripping the edge of the bench so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand," he said softly. "Let me in." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But the fear of his reaction, of crossing a line that could never be uncrossed, kept me frozen. Coach must have sensed my hesitation because he didn't push. Instead, he leaned back slightly, giving me space. "Look," he said, his voice calm. "I know you've got a lot going on in your head right now, but whatever it is, I'm not going to judge you for it. You've got my word." His sincerity was like a lifeline, and for a moment, I let myself believe it. I let myself imagine what it would be like to tell him everything, to bear the messy truth of my feelings and hope he didn't look at me differently. "I think about you," I blurted out before I could stop myself. The silence that followed was deafening. Coach's expression didn't change, but the slight widening of his eyes betrayed his surprise. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out everything else. The hum of the air conditioning, the faint clink of weights left on the rack, even the sound of my own breathing. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. I couldn't look at him. My gaze dropped to my hands, my fingers trembling against the bench. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely audible. "It's just, when I'm around you, it's different, and I don't know how to deal with it." Coach was silent for a moment, and I braced myself for the worst, for him to pull away, to tell me I was out of line, to shatter the fragile connection we'd built. But when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured. "Mason," he said, his tone steady. "Look at me." I forced myself to meet his gaze, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger or disappointment. It was something else, something I couldn't quite name but that made my chest ache even more. "You're not messed up," he said firmly, "and you're not alone in this." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. He wasn't pulling away. He wasn't shutting me out. Instead, he was leaning closer, his presence grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. "I'm here," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever this is, whatever you're feeling, you don't have to face it by yourself." The air between us felt electric, the weight of his words sinking into my skin. I searched his face for any sign of hesitation, any hint that he might be saying this out of obligation rather than choice. But all I saw was honesty. "Coach," I started, my voice trembling. "Darnell," he interrupted gently. "Call me Darnell." The sound of his name on my tongue felt intimate, almost too much to handle, but I nodded, my chest tightening with emotion. "Darnell," I said softly, the word lingering in the air between us. His lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile, and in that moment I felt the fragile line between us dissolve completely. The silence between us was thick, heavy with unspoken words and the weight of everything I'd just admitted. Coach, Darnell, didn't move away. If anything, he leaned closer, his expression steady, calm, and far more understanding than I thought I deserved. My heart pounded so loudly that I was sure he could hear it, and the heat in my face betrayed the storm of emotion swirling inside me. "You're brave, Mason," he said, his voice low and even. "Do you know that?" I blinked, startled by his words. "Brave?" He nodded. "You've been carrying all this, haven't you? Keeping it to yourself because you were scared of what people might think. That takes strength, but it takes even more strength to say it out loud." My throat tightened and I looked down at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. I wanted to believe him, but all I felt was confusion and fear. What if I'd just ruined everything? What if this made him see me differently, made him regret all the time and effort he'd invested in me? "I don't feel strong," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I feel lost." Darnell reached out then, his hand brushing lightly against my arm. The touch was brief, almost hesitant, but it sent a shiver down my spine. When I looked up, his eyes were locked on mine, intense yet soft, as if he was trying to see right through me. "You're not lost," he said firmly. "You're figuring things out, and that's okay. Nobody has all the answers, Mason. Not me, not you, not anyone. But you've got to give yourself permission to feel what you feel." His words hung in the air, and for a moment I felt like I could breathe again. He wasn't pulling away, wasn't judging me. Instead, he was offering me something I hadn't realized I needed: understanding. "But what if—" I started, then hesitated. "What if it's wrong?" Darnell's brow furrowed slightly and he leaned back, his hands resting on his thighs. "Why would it be wrong?" "Because—" I struggled to find the words, my thoughts a tangled mess. "Because I shouldn't feel this way. Not about you." He exhaled softly, his gaze never wavering. "Feelings aren't about should or shouldn't, Mason. They just are, and it's what you do with them that matters." I bit my lip, my chest tightening again. "But it's not something I can just ignore." "And you shouldn't have to," he said gently. "But you also don't have to figure it all out right now." His calmness was unnerving, but also comforting. It was as if he knew exactly what I needed to hear, even when I didn't know it myself. He wasn't rushing me, wasn't forcing me to confront everything all at once. He was just there, steady and unshakable. "Darnell," I said, testing his name on my lips again. "What if this ruins everything?" "It won't," he said with quiet certainty. "Not if we're honest with each other, not if we take this one step at a time." His words made my chest ache in a way that was both painful and freeing. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this moment wouldn't spiral out of control, but there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the fear of what might come next. "What does that even mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Taking it one step at a time?" Darnell smiled faintly, his hand brushing against mine again, this time lingering just a little longer. "It means we don't rush, we don't force anything, we just let things happen." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that settled deep in my chest. I nodded slowly, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't fully process. This was uncharted territory and I had no idea where it would lead. But in that moment I realized I didn't have to know. Not yet. "I don't want to mess this up," I whispered, the admission raw and vulnerable. "You won't," he said, his voice steady. "We won't." The way he said it, with such quiet conviction, made my pulse quicken. I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation or doubt, but all I saw was a calm resolve that made my heart ache. "You're not alone in this, Mason," he added, his hand finally resting fully over mine. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." The warmth of his touch was grounding, and for the first time in weeks the chaos in my mind began to quiet. I still didn't have all the answers, didn't know what this meant or where it would lead, but I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to face it alone. I nodded, a small, tentative smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "Okay." Darnell's own smile was subtle but genuine, and as he squeezed my hand lightly, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. This wasn't a solution, wasn't a fix to all the confusion and fear, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The weight of his hand on mine lingered long after he pulled it away, the warmth seeping into my skin like an unspoken promise. Darnell stood, his movements slow and deliberate, and for a moment, I thought the conversation was over. But instead of leaving, he took a step closer, his presence filling the space between us in a way that made my pulse quicken. "You don't have to say anything else tonight," he said softly, his voice low and steady. "But I need you to know something." I looked up at him, my chest tight with anticipation. His expression was calm, yet there was an intensity in his eyes that made it impossible to look away. "I see you, Mason," he said, his words deliberate, careful. "I see how hard you try, how much you carry, and I'm here for you. Not just as your coach, but as someone who cares about you. Really cares." His words hit me like a punch to the chest, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I wanted to respond, to tell him how much his support meant to me, but the knot in my throat refused to loosen. All I could do was nod, hoping he understood what I couldn't put into words. Darnell's lips curved into a faint smile, and he reached out, his hand brushing lightly against my shoulder before falling back to his side. "Get some rest, kid," he said, his tone softer now. "You've had a long day." I nodded again, my heart still racing as I watched him turn and walk toward the exit. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the quiet gym, and I stayed frozen in place, my thoughts swirling. When the door closed behind him, I let out a shaky breath, the stillness of the room pressing down on me. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the conversation in my head. His words, his touch, the way he'd looked at me, it all felt surreal, like something out of a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was real, and it had changed everything. By the time I finally left the gym, the parking lot was empty, the night air cool against my flushed skin. I climbed into my car, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. The drive home was a blur, my mind too full to focus on anything else. When I reached my apartment, the silence inside felt deafening. I collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. Every part of me felt raw, exposed, like I'd just torn down a wall I hadn't even realized I'd built. The vulnerability was terrifying, but there was something else too, something I couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe? Or relief? Whatever it was, it left me restless, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion weighing on me. The next day, I avoided the gym. I told myself it was because I needed a break, that my body needed time to recover. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't ready to face him again, wasn't ready to confront the feelings I'd barely begun to unpack. By the third day, the absence was unbearable. I found myself pacing my apartment, my phone in hand, as I debated whether to text him. A simple message, just to test the waters. But what would I even say? Finally, I gave in, my fingers trembling as I typed out a message. "Hey, Coach, just wanted to say thanks for the other night." It meant a lot. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding as I hit send. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one heavier than the last, until my phone buzzed with a reply. "Always here for you, Mason. Let me know when you're ready to talk again." His response was simple, but it carried a weight that settled in my chest. I read it over and over, my thumb hovering over the screen as I debated how to respond. In the end, I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I threw myself back into training, pushing my body to its limits in an attempt to quiet the storm in my head. But no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much weight I lifted or how many miles I ran, I couldn't escape the memory of his words, his touch, the way he'd looked at me. When I finally returned to the gym, it was late, the kind of hour when the space was nearly empty. I hoped he wouldn't be there, that I could slip in and out unnoticed. But as soon as I stepped through the doors, I saw him. He was at the squat rack, his back to me, his broad shoulders shifting under the weight of the barbell. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I considered turning around and leaving. But then he spotted me, his eyes locking onto mine from across the room. He smiled, a small, almost hesitant curve of his lips, and nodded in acknowledgement. My chest tightened, a mix of anxiety and something else surging through me. Before I could overthink it, I walked over, my legs feeling like lead with every step. "Hey," I said, my voice unsteady. "Hey," he replied, his smile softening. "Good to see you back." I nodded, unable to meet his gaze for too long. "Yeah, just needed some time, I guess." "That's okay," he said, his tone reassuring. "Sometimes you've got to step back to figure things out." His words felt pointed, deliberate, and I couldn't help but wonder if he was talking about more than just training. I glanced up at him, searching his face for clues, but his expression was calm, unreadable. "Do you have time to talk?" he asked after a moment, his voice careful. I hesitated, my chest tightening. Part of me wanted to run, to avoid whatever conversation was coming. But another part, the part that had been aching since that night in the gym, needed to hear what he had to say. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I do." Darnell nodded, motioning toward the bench press. We sat, the familiar creak of the vinyl cushion grounding me as he turned to face me. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice steady. "And I want you to know something. Whatever you're feeling, it's valid, and it doesn't change how I see you." His words made my chest ache, the sincerity in his voice cutting through the fear that had been gripping me. I opened my mouth to respond, but he held up a hand, stopping me. "You don't have to explain yourself to me, Mason," he continued. "I just need you to know that I'm here for you. Always." The weight of his words settled over me, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of calm. I nodded slowly, my voice trembling as I finally found the courage to speak. "Thank you," I said, my throat tight with emotion. "That means more than you know." Darnell smiled, his hand brushing lightly against mine. And in that moment I realized that whatever happened next, I wouldn't have to face it alone. The warmth of his hand lingered even after it left mine, and for a moment we sat in silence. It wasn't the awkward kind. No tension or discomfort, just a quiet understanding that words could only complicate. The air between us was heavy, but not oppressive. It felt charged, alive, as if something profound had just shifted and we were both trying to navigate it. "I was afraid I'd messed everything up," I admitted finally, my voice soft. Darnell's brow furrowed and he shook his head. "You didn't mess anything up, Mason. You were honest. That takes guts." His words felt like a balm, easing the knot in my chest. But there was still so much left unsaid, so much I didn't know how to articulate. The feelings I'd been wrestling with for weeks, months even, they weren't just about admiration or gratitude. They went deeper, pulled at parts of me I didn't fully understand. And sitting here, so close to him, it was impossible to ignore. "I don't think I've ever been this honest with anyone," I confessed, my gaze fixed on the floor. "Not even myself." Darnell shifted slightly, his body angling toward me. "That's part of figuring out who you are," he said. "You've got to face the things that scare you, even when it's messy, especially when it's messy." His words hit deeper than I expected, and I looked up, meeting his gaze. There was no judgment in his eyes, no impatience, just a quiet resolve that made my chest ache. I wanted to tell him everything, to lay it all bare and hope he could help me make sense of it. But where would I even start? You make it sound easy, I said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my lips. It's not, he admitted with a small chuckle. Trust me, I've had my fair share of messy moments. His honesty caught me off guard, and I tilted my head, curiosity replacing some of the fear. Like what? He hesitated, his expression thoughtful. Let's just say, I know what it's like to wrestle with feelings you didn't expect, to not know what to do with them. The vulnerability in his tone made my heart skip, and for a moment I wondered if he was talking about the same thing I was. But I didn't dare ask, didn't dare let myself hope for something I wasn't sure I could handle. Instead, I nodded, my chest tightening as I searched for the right words. I don't know what to do with this. Darnell leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. You don't have to figure it all out right now, he said. Sometimes the best thing you can do is let yourself feel it. Don't overthink it, don't run from it. Just sit with it. I nodded again, the simplicity of his advice somehow both comforting and terrifying. Sitting with it, acknowledging the weight of my feelings without trying to push them away, felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. But it also felt necessary. I'm trying, I said quietly. I really am. He smiled then, a small, almost imperceptible curve of his lips that made my chest ache. That's all anyone can ask. The silence stretched between us again, but this time it felt different, lighter somehow, as if the weight of the conversation had shifted. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, my shoulders relaxing for the first time in what felt like days. Do you want to keep training tonight? Darnell asked after a moment, his voice careful, almost tentative. I thought about it, about the familiar comfort of routine and the way it helped quiet the noise in my head. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I didn't want to distract myself. I wanted to sit with it, just like he'd said. Maybe tomorrow, I said, my voice soft but steady. He nodded, his expression understanding. That's fair. We stood then, the sound of the bench creaking beneath us breaking the quiet. I followed him to the exit, the weight of the conversation still hanging in the air but no longer suffocating. When we reached the door, he turned to me, his hand resting lightly on the frame. You're not alone in this, Mason, he said again, his voice firm but gentle. Don't forget that. I won't, I promised, my voice trembling with emotion. He nodded, his gaze lingering on mine for a moment longer before he pushed the door open and stepped into the night. I watched him go, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of hope. I didn't know what came next, didn't know how to untangle the mess of feelings inside me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone anymore. When I got home that night, the stillness of my apartment didn't feel as oppressive as it usually did. I sat on the couch, my thoughts quieter now, my chest lighter. The fear was still there, lingering at the edges, but it didn't feel as overwhelming. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen as I debated sending another message. After a moment, I typed out a simple text. Thanks for tonight, for listening. It means a lot. The reply came almost immediately. Always. Get some rest, Mason. I smiled, the weight in my chest easing just a little more. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I didn't have to carry it all by myself.